What's up, guys? I'm Zach Thompson of Blue Corner MMA, and we need to talk about this guy who is just 24 years old and already has a successful title defense under his belt. But how did we get here, you might ask? Well, this is Joshua Van, and he is 5'5", 120 pounds, and he is the current flyweight champion of the UFC. But he had an extremely rough uprising. His story starts with his family having to flee his home country due to military conflicts, and he ended up in Malaysia, then finally in the United States. Joshua made his MMA debut in Fury Fighting Championship League in October of 2021, where he picked up the win by TKO in his MMA debut. Van went on to go 7-1 in Fury, ultimately ending as champion when he beat Cleveland McLean for the belt. Van made his UFC debut in June of 2023 with a tough split decision victory at the age of just 21 years old. Van's first tough matchup came against the always challenging Charles Johnson, where Van took his first UFC loss by TKO 20 seconds into the third round. This being relevant because Johnson actually just picked up his 20th MMA win after his UFC 330 win. Van's next fight after that tough loss came against Edgar Chairez, where Van won by unanimous decision. This being relevant because Edgar's only other loss in the UFC came to Tatsuro Taira, who Van beat at UFC 328, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Van's next fight was another decision victory against Cody Durden, who went on a 3-fight losing streak after his loss to Van. Was that because of Van? I guess it's only known by Durden himself, but my guess is he was probably messed up from that fight. Van's next fight came at UFC 313, headlined by Pereira vs. Ankalaev, which Van won by decision, unanimous of course, against a Japanese fighter. I don't really know how to pronounce his name. Call me casual if you want, I guess. But I do know that Van's next opponent came as his first ever ranked opponent in the UFC, in the number 12 ranked at the time, Bruno Silva, where Van picked up the finish with 55 seconds left in the fight. This coming at UFC 316, which will be relevant literally right now. Because just 21 days later, the newly ranked 10-seeded Joshua Van took a short notice fight against the number one contender in Brandon Royval, which became an amazing thriller of a fight, which earned Fight of the Year for 2025 and came as a unanimous decision victory for Joshua Van as the underdog, the newly ranked guy at just 23, and this was just absolutely unexpected. Like I said, Fight of the Year from the 23-year-old against Brandon Royval, which was the number one contender at UFC 313, which was just amazing. That was Taporia versus Oliveira, and yeah, that fight was wow. I mean, Fight of the Year for a reason, right? Unanimous victory, the 10 seed versus the 1 seed, like nobody expected that fight to be that good, like at all. After that amazing victory, Van became the number one contender for the flyweight title after beating the number one contender, of course, and faced Alexander Pantoja as the co-main event at UFC 323, where just 26 seconds into Van's first ever championship fight, Pantoja breaks his arm, meaning at just 24 years of age, which is like the second youngest in UFC history behind John Jones, who did it in 23 years. Joshua Van became the UFC champion, which is just unfathomable. Like, nobody expected that. But was this match a fluke? Is Van even a worthy champion? Is what all the people were asking after that fight. And all those questions were going to be answered at UFC 328, Van vs. Teixeira. And Van is once again featured as the co-main event to the amazing matchup that was Strickland vs. Khamzat, but we'll talk about that in a different video. In Van's first ever title defense as the flyweight champion, at just 24 years old, he gets the finish in another amazing fight, 1 minute and 32 seconds into the final round, which, with that amazing title defense, Joshua Van was solidified himself as a serious threat and, in my opinion, potentially one of the greatest flyweight fighters of all time. But some of you might be asking, Zach, what's next for Joshua Van? Well, Van is set to have his rematch against Pantoja at UFC 331 as the main event for the first time ever in Van's career, and leading into what is set to become an amazing card with Arman versus Ruffy, a couple of great heavyweight fights in there. But finally, I think that if Pantoja and Van can go the distance, or Van can get a clean finish on Pantoja without any arms breaking or legs breaking, no dirty stoppages, I think that Van could become a serious threat, and him proving himself against a great like Pantoja, which I think he can seriously get the win. I think that Van could be breathing down the throat of Mighty Mouse, Demetrius Johnson, as the flyweight GOAT when his career is over. But if you've made it this far, please consider liking, subscribing, and even turning on notifications so you don't miss us talk about the next champion on the list in Peter Yan, aka Sean O'Malley's greatest call out. But thank you all for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace out.